Today we will be covering the oldest footprints ever discovered. From the first steps ever taken by land animals, to giant dinosaurs, ancient Neanderthals, and the absolute oldest footprints ever left by modern humans. It's a story of how life conquered land over hundreds of millions of years. So let's jump right into some of the most recent and controversial footprints. From there, we will keep going deeper and deeper in time. Our first stop takes us to the blinding expanses of White Sands, New Mexico. Etched into the baked crust of this desert basin are 21,000-year-old human footprints, and that date has sparked major debates among archaeologists. As young as they are for this video, their age makes them the oldest human footprints in the Americas. It puts them right at the height of the last glacial maximum. At that time, the arid desert we see today was the lush, muddy shoreline of ancient Lake Otero. It was a world ruled by Ice Age giants like woolly mammoths, direwolves, and the towering ground sloth. Preserved in this prehistoric mud are the tracks of a young woman or teenage boy walking rapidly. Researchers have even noticed that the depth of the footprints fluctuates. They think this is because the woman was carrying a heavy toddler on her hip, occasionally setting the child down in the mud before picking them up again. But the scene gets even more interesting when the human tracks intersect with a giant. There's a case where a human footprint is set directly within that of a massive ground sloth. The animal's tracks show that it reared up on its hind legs and changed direction, suggesting it was actively avoiding or reacting to the nearby human presence. Were these people hunting the Ice Age animal, or was their interaction more cordial? It's hard to tell. But the mystery gets even deeper. We have to acknowledge that the dates here aren't set in stone. For decades, the Clovis first model dictated that humans didn't arrive in the Americas until roughly 13,000 years ago. These tracks were radiocarbon dated using ancient seeds found above and below them. Those above dated to 21,000 years ago, those below to 23,000 years ago. This would push back human arrival in the Americas an extra 10,000 years. Critics immediately claim that the dates were an illusion. They argue that the seeds suffered from the hard water effect. This means they absorbed old carbon from the lake, which makes them appear older than they actually are. However, subsequent testing on pollen and other organic sediments strongly supports the older dates. The age of these tracks get harder to deny as more research gets published. Ultimately, the White Sands tracks leave us with a profound question. Were these the first people in America, or just the first people we have evidence of? But that's just the Western Hemisphere. The oldest footprints belonging to our species, Homo sapiens, are far older. To find those, we must travel to the Cape South coast of South Africa. Along this rugged shoreline, scientists have uncovered the fossilized footprints of anatomically modern humans. They date back to 153,000 years ago, making them the oldest discovered thus far. In those ancient times, the area was a shifting landscape of sand dunes and wet coastal flats. As early Homo sapiens walked across the damp sands, their footprints were quickly covered by blowing wind. This preserved them in stone for millennia. But with a date that old, how do we know they belong to us? First, the big toe. It's distinctly aligned parallel to the other toes, rather than splaying out like apes or earlier human species. Second, the prints show a prominent arch that resembles ours. Third, Homo sapiens were the only hominin species occupying southern Africa at that time. Older relatives like Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis had long vanished from the region, and these tracks offer great detail into the lives of our ancient ancestors. Researchers have identified footprints of multiple adults and children, showing that groups travel together. And this is a common theme we'll see for other human species. Evidence of foraging for marine resources has been found in association with them. Most surprisingly, there is even evidence that these people were using walking sticks and wearing rudimentary sandals. Sites like the Cape South coast remind us how old our species truly is and how similar we are to our deepest ancestors. But why stop at our own species? The footprints of many extinct humans have also been discovered. For example, the oldest Neanderthal footprints date back to about 106,000 years ago. Note how this is more recent than the Homo sapiens prints in South Africa. This overlap is just one small example of how our species were living on Earth at the same time. Known as the Matalascañas tracks, They are found along the coast of Huelva in Spain. 87 distinct tracks were identified in total, but they don't belong to your typical hunting party of adult males. Instead, the size and spacing of these prints reveal a vibrant multi-generational community. The group included toddlers, older children, adolescents, and adults, but a profound mystery lingers over the tracks. The behavior captured in the clay is strangely chaotic. Several prints seem to belong to children leaping, splashing, and playing together in the shallows of an ancient lake. There are no tools, no animal bones, and no signs of foraging. Only these joyful moments of prehistoric childhood. So what brought this entire group down to the water's edge? Given the lack of evidence, it doesn't seem like they were foraging. Maybe it was for the same reasons we go to the beach today. To relax, spend time with friends and family, and play together. Many people tend to think of Neanderthals as less intelligent or less cultural than our species, but science continues to show us that they were far more sophisticated than we once thought. And this site might hold the evidence that Neanderthals could enjoy some recreation down by the shore. As cool as Neanderthals are, they're pretty well known. So let's explore some lesser known human species to see what their footprints say about them. Our next site takes us to Haysborough, England. The cliffs here are stunning, but they are prone to storm erosion. The village is known for its medieval architecture that's slowly being consumed by the sea. And in 2013, the heavy waves eroded enough of those cliffs to expose a series of hollows in the hardened mud. Scientists rushed to document them, realizing they were looking at the fossilized footprints of up to 5 individuals. Again, a mix of adults and children. But these prints are far older than anything we've seen so far. They date to between 850,000 and 950,000 years ago. This makes them the oldest known footprints of a human species outside of Africa. So what species was it? Scientists suspect they belong to Homo antecessor, or pioneer man. This is the oldest hominin to have explored Western Europe. It's known only from fossils found in the Atapuerca Mountains of Spain. The Haysborough prints fall within the foot sizes and estimated stature of the fossils at Atapuerca, but without actual fossils at the site, it's hard to say for sure. Later studies have suggested that they belong to Homo erectus, but it's still up for debate, and we'll be diving into that species next. Documenting these footprints posed a huge challenge for archaeologists. It was a race against the relentless North Sea. Because the mud was exposed at low tide, on an active beach, scientists knew it was only a matter of time before the footprints were totally eroded away. Using photogrammetry, they rapidly captured high-resolution images from multiple angles to reconstruct the tracks in 3D digital models. It was a frantic rush, but it proved to be justified. Within just 2 weeks of their initial exposure, the punishing waves washed away the physical prints. Today, not a single trace of them remain on the beach, meaning our entire understanding of this nearly million-year-old moment relies entirely on those precious digital scans. Next, we have Homo erectus. I've talked about this species almost ad nauseum on this channel. Some of you might even be annoyed by it, but it's mostly because they're so important to the human species. They were the first humans with relatively modern body proportions and really big brains. They were also the first species to leave Africa, but their oldest footprints are still found in Africa. The Ileret footprints in Kenya are about 1.5 million years old. Initially, researchers documented at least 14 distinct footprints, organized into 4 trails. An unprecedented 97 footprints from at least 20 Homo erectus individuals have since been found. But what makes them truly incredible is how familiar they look. The deep heel, the distinct arch, and the forward-facing big toe prove that these hominins walked exactly like we do today. They were upright and walked on 2 legs, shifting their weight from heel to toe. With more than 1 million years separating us, it shows that when something is really adaptive, evolution can lock that design in place. So what was it that their feet were adapted to? The structure and mechanics of their feet indicate that Erectus was more efficient at long-distance traveling. They were great at absorbing impact and springing forward. This lowered the energetic costs of traveling on 2 feet. It transformed our ancestors into elite endurance walkers, and probably runners too. Interestingly, the tracks here are male-dominated. Some researchers interpret that as an ancient primate behavior, border patrols. It mimics modern chimpanzee communities, where adult males band together to aggressively guard territorial boundaries. It paints a vivid and disturbing picture of early humans guarding their borders against outside dangers. By the way, archaeologists recently just found some 1.4 million year old footprints belonging to a strange species called Paranthropus boisei. I won't go too deep into it here, but I wrote about the discovery in my most recent newsletter. So if you want to stay up to date on big discoveries like this in the future, you can subscribe to my newsletter for free using the link in the description. Finally, we have one more set of footprints before moving beyond the human lineage, and things are going to start getting crazy. But in 1976, paleontologist Mary Leakey and her team made a groundbreaking discovery in Laetoli, Tanzania. Buried beneath layers of ancient volcanic ash were the oldest footprints belonging to our human lineage. Dating to 3.6 million years ago, it's the closest we can get to seeing humanity's first steps. It's a 75-foot-long trail made by two individuals walking side by side. A smaller third individual steps precisely into the footprints of the larger one ahead, possibly a child literally following in their parents' footsteps. The Laetoli tracks were left by Australopithecus afarensis, the same species as the famous Lucy fossil. The fossils of at least 23 afarensis individuals were found in the exact same sediment layers. The discovery provided the first undeniable physical proof that this species walked upright and on two legs long before Homo erectus ever evolved. It also implies that we were walking upright before we had big brains or stone tools. So this might be the trait that truly set us on our own path. That said, afarensis' feet appeared to have been a little flatter and its toes had some more spacing. It wasn't modern yet, but it was paving the way for later species like erectus and us. Now let's take a massive leap back to the very first mammals. Mammals didn't come to dominate the planet until about 65 million years ago. When a massive asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out the dinosaurs, tiny mammals finally had the space and opportunity to grow and spread. But the oldest mammals started evolving millions of years earlier than that, and they left us footprints as evidence. Among the most fascinating of these ancient tracks is Brasilichnium. These footprints are all we have of whatever critters made them. So, Brasilichnium is a name given strictly to the shape and pattern of the footprints rather than a specific biological animal. They were pressed into the earth during the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous periods, roughly 130 to 140 million years ago. Found primarily in Brazil and western North America, they belong to small, four-legged mammals. Most individual footprints measure only about an inch wide. The animal would have been the size of a modern mouse, rat, or squirrel. And the tracks tell a story of survival. They lived in harsh deserts, similar to Africa's modern Namib Desert. These furry little pioneers were scurrying across massive sand dunes. They probably moved quickly to avoid predators. The dinosaurs weren't yet extinct, so they would have been outmatched almost anywhere they went. When paleontologists study Brasilichnium, they find something puzzling. Almost all the footprints lead in the exact same direction. For miles, these tiny creatures walked up the slopes of the sand dunes, but there are almost no tracks going back down. Scientists have found this difficult to explain. One possibility is called the slump factor. Walking upward requires steep, firm steps that fossilized well, while sliding down slopes triggered mini landslides that instantly erased the downward tracks. The simple erosion of the downslope sides biases the preservation of the upslope sides. So while the bones of these creatures are likely long gone, their one-way march across the ancient sands gives us a tiny glimpse into their ancient world. If we go back about 270 million years ago, we find the tracks of animals that blur the line between mammal and reptile. During the Permian period, America, Eurasia, and Africa were connected in a supercontinent called Pangaea. In what would eventually become Spain, lived the oldest known saber-toothed predators, Gorgonopsians. While they looked reptilian at first, they shared critical traits with mammals that reptiles never developed. This included differentiated teeth. Reptiles have rows of identical teeth, but Gorgonopsians had specialized incisors, slicing cheek teeth, and their famous saber-toothed canines. These are traits we see in modern predatory mammals. Also, unlike the sprawling side-to-side waddle of lizards, Gorgonopsians walked with their legs tucked more directly beneath their bodies. This was a major evolutionary leap toward the mammalian stride. In 2025, scientists found their footprints and skeletal remains in the red sandstone cliffs of Majorca. This established a definitive link between the tracks and these apex predators. The hind prints are much larger, measuring up to 4 inches long, while the front prints are nearly half that size. Both feet had 5 toes, but the hind foot featured an unusually long 4th toe and digits that curved sharply inward. At the very tips of these toes, the animal left deep, elongated impressions shaped like menacing hooks. This is clear evidence of massive claws probably used to take down prey. Most remarkably, one exceptionally well-preserved footprint captured skin creases along the outer toe. These wrinkles capture a rare case where the fossil record shows us details of an animal's soft tissue. But these proto-mammals were marching toward an unavoidable doom. Just a few million years later, the Earth suffered the Great Dying, the most brutal mass extinction in history. It ended the Permian period, wiped out the Gorgonopsians completely, and erased this first attempt at a mammalian dynasty. But where one empire falls, another one rises. From the ashes of this apocalypse, a new group of reptiles would inherit the Earth, and they evolved into the most terrifying monsters the world has ever seen: the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs left us some of the most interesting tracks in the entire fossil record. Take Lark Quarry, for example. Also known as Dinosaur Stampede National Monument, this site is located in Queensland, Australia. Can you guess how it got that name? It's considered the world's only known example of a dinosaur stampede. Roughly 95 million years ago, 4,000 footprints belonging to around 150 dinosaurs passed through this site. They were mostly small, 2-legged dinosaurs. Some were carnivorous, like the chicken-sized coelurosaurs. Others were emu-sized herbivores, like ornithopods. They probably arrived at this site of an ancient lake peacefully, but suddenly, a massive predatory dinosaur arrived. The panic was immediate. The small dinos scattered in every direction, running for their lives. Their frantic footprints were quickly covered by rising water and preserved for millions of years. Today, it's a thrilling snapshot of prehistoric survival. However, a deeper mystery hides beneath the surface of this ancient crime scene. For decades, paleontologists believed the attacker was a terrifying 11-foot-tall Australovenator. This was a deadly meat-eater who they all competed with in ancient Australia. But recent research turned this theory upside down. Closer analysis of the larger footprints suggests the attacker might not have been a carnivore at all. Instead, the tracks closely match a large herbivore, possibly a Muttaburrasaurus. This leaves experts with a case they haven't yet cracked. If a giant attacker was actually a harmless plant eater, the entire stampede may have been a tragic mistake. On the other hand, this herbivore might have possessed an aggressive territorial nature, a nature that we can't interpret from its fossils. The true catalyst of the Lark Quarry stampede remains a mystery. The footprints of this next dinosaur site bring some mind-bending geology into play. This is not a special effect from a science fiction movie. It is a real place on our planet. Welcome to Cal Orco in Bolivia, home to possibly the most spectacular display of dinosaur tracks in the world. Located near the city of Sucre, the Cal Orco Wall stretches over 3,000 feet long and rises 300 feet high. It's covered in more than 5,000 individual dinosaur footprints dating back 68 million years. These include several distinct groups of dinosaurs. First are the titanosaurs, which were massive, long-necked sauropods that ranked among the largest land mammals ever to exist. Next are the theropods. They were bipedal meat-eaters, including a juvenile Tyrannosaurus rex. The site also features rare prints from ankylosaurs. These 4-legged plant eaters are known for their thick, bony armor. Finally, the hadrosaurs left their mark. These represent medium-sized duckbill herbivores. And as a side note, I'm proud to say that the first hadrosaur ever discovered was found in my home state of New Jersey. So these species are cool and all, but how did their tracks end up on a completely vertical wall? The secret lies in the planet's violent geological past. Millions of years ago, this area was actually a flat, muddy shoreline of a prehistoric tropical lake. The dinosaurs pressed their heavy feet into the damp clay. Over time, these layers of mud hardened into limestone, Then, long after those dinosaurs left, tectonic forces took over. The collision of the Earth's tectonic plates pushed the Andes Mountains upward, violently tilting the hardened lake bed completely sideways. What was once a flat floor became a vertical snapshot of Cretaceous life. In the small landlocked kingdom of Lesotho, Africa, the Earth holds terrifying evidence of a Jurassic monster. For generations, scientists believed that the early Jurassic period was dominated only by smaller, agile predators. The period spans from about 201 million to 174 million years ago. The massive T-Rex didn't exist until about 130 million years later, but one discovery shattered this timeline completely. Deep within the Maseru district, researchers uncovered the Lesotho megatheropod tracks. These three-toed footprints measure an incredible half a meter long and about the same in width. They belong to a newly classified colossal carnivore named Kayentopus ambrochalohali. By analyzing the deep impressions left in the ancient mud, experts estimate this monster was a staggering 9 meters long and stood 3 meters tall at the hip. It was an early forerunner to the Tyrannosaurus rex. This apex predator completely redefined what scientists thought was possible for its era. They are the largest theropod tracks of this era ever found in Africa. But here's where the story turns into a strange mystery. While these enormous tracks prove the giants existed, not a single bone, tooth, or shard of this creature has ever been found. The body fossil record for mega carnivores in southern Africa during this epoch is completely blank. We have an intricately detailed map of its deadly stride, yet the beast itself remains invisible. How did an animal this massive, which clearly dominated the landscape, leave behind an abundance of footprints, but absolutely no skeletal remains? It's yet another example of how our knowledge of the past is shaped by erosion. But deep in the heart of the Grand Canyon lies a geological wonder that even predates the dinosaurs and Gorgonopsians, the Coconino Sandstone. The solidified sand dunes of this massive rock layer are clear as day, and they date to roughly 280 million years ago. Thousands of fossilized footprints left behind by mysterious, prehistoric, four-legged creatures are set directly into the steep rock faces. If you walk along the Bright Angel Trail today, you can spot these ancient trackways. Most of the prints belong to small, lizard-like reptiles or very early mammal ancestors known as synapsids. What makes these tracks incredibly fascinating to researchers is their bizarre, uniform alignment. Curiously, almost all of the animals are traveling strictly uphill. It's reminiscent of the Brazilichnium tracks we discussed earlier. Their footprints show sideways drifting, claw marks, and sudden directional change. That sideways drift indicates they were moving against some sort of force, presumably desert wind. For decades, the standard geological explanation has been that these creatures were simply trekking across dry desert sand dunes. But something interesting emerged when scientists tried to replicate exactly how these tracks were made. In dry sand, heavy footprints cause dunes to avalanche, erasing fine claw marks and toe impressions entirely. Modern experimenters discovered that the only way to perfectly recreate the crisp, detailed features in the Coconino Sandstone is if the tracks were pressed into wet sand, specifically while underwater. This sparked a profound geological paradox. If this rock layer truly represents a massive bone-dry desert, why do the footprints behave exactly as if animals were frantically swimming against a rushing current? Plus, many of these trackways end abruptly into thin air. It's as if the creatures were suddenly lifted up and carried away by water. Were these land-dwelling animals caught in a catastrophic flood? Or did they live a semi-aquatic life similar to hippos today? We may never know. The prints at the Grand Canyon are so old, they blur the line between animals adapted to land and those adapted to water. As we step farther back in time, we reach the point where animals first start to colonize land. The earliest evidence of this comes from Poland. In 2010, researchers found prints at the Zakomi Quarry in Poland's Holy Cross Mountains. The dolomite rock in which they sit dates to the Devonian period, 395 million years ago. They were left by some of the very first creatures to sprout legs and wander out of ancient waves. What makes these tracks so informative is their spectacular level of detail. They don't show the drag marks of fins or bellies. Instead, they are clear impressions of distinct individual footpads and digits. We don't know the exact species that made them, but they were some form of tetrapod, a four-legged land animal. They possessed well-developed limbs, capable of hauling their substantial weight. Some of them are estimated to have been up to 8 feet long. The Zakalmi tracks are roughly 18 million years older than the oldest known tetrapod body fossils. It goes to show that we can't just rely on fossilized skeletons alone to understand the past. Even more unsettling is that they predate the famous Tiktaalik by 10 million years. Tiktaalik was a transitional species, a quote-unquote fish with legs. So according to the textbook evolutionary timeline, the animals that made these tracks should not have existed yet. This opens the door for paleontologists to ask some interesting questions. Did life on land evolve earlier than we once thought? Did different species adapt to land independently at various times? The Zakalmi tracks are just one data point, getting us closer to those answers. For our last tracks of the video, we're actually going to stay in the Holy Cross Mountains. 400 million years ago, the land here was barren, silent, and devoid of animal life. The oceans, however, were teeming. In the small abandoned quarries of Uyazd and Kopiet, scientists found a fossilized trackway named Reptanicus acutori. But the imprints aren't the footprints of limbs and toes. They were made by primitive lungfish, known as dipnoans. They were preserved in ancient tidal flats that were sealed by protective volcanic ash. They truly represent this transitional state between fish and land animals. They likely swam, but these prints show them exploring across exposed mud. They left behind drag marks of their trunks, tails, and fins. Most remarkably, the tracks show that the fish would forcefully drive their snouts down into the sediment. This anchored their heads to create leverage to haul their heavy bodies forward. The traces predate fully terrestrial tetrapod trackways by roughly 10 million years. It makes them the absolute oldest evidence of vertebrate land mobility ever found. By analyzing the 3D structures of their snout imprints, researchers noticed a chillingly consistent pattern. Nearly 97% of these traces were tilted sharply to the left. They argue that this represents the oldest documented evidence of handedness in the entire history of backbone animals. Now, they obviously didn't have hands, at least like we do, but they consistently twisted their bodies to the left to anchor themselves, which is kind of a wild evolutionary story. Modern vertebrates, from reptiles to birds to humans, overwhelmingly favor the right side of the body, but these prehistoric fish did the exact opposite. It suggests that our modern right-sided preference wasn't there from the very beginning. Instead, the earliest pioneers of land living might have been entirely left dominant. It'd be interesting to consider when this switch might have happened. Like this handedness, many of the traits we possess today are the product of long evolutionary histories. And it's so fascinating that the trails of ancient lungfish can offer insights into those histories. But there's one strange theory that tries to explain a lot of human traits by resorting to adaptations to water. It argues that ancient humans adapted to life in water and that we evolved into who we are today because of it. It's called the aquatic ape hypothesis, and you can watch my video about it here. Thanks for watching until the end. I'll see you in the next one.